whispered against the shore, a language only she seemed to understand. Emily had always loved the ocean. Her laughter would rise and fall like the tide itself, drawing me closer every time we met on the secluded stretch of beach we'd claimed as our own. It wasn't much, just a narrow crescent of sand flanked by jagged rocks, but it was ours. We'd been coming here every evening for the past year, a quiet escape from the humdrum chaos of life. On the night it all began, the sunset was particularly vivid, streaks of orange and purple painting the sky in surreal hues. Emily was barefoot, as usual, her hair spilling over her shoulders like liquid gold. She turned to me, grinning, and said, "Promise me we'll always come back here, no matter what." "Always," I replied, and meant it. That was the last time I saw her alive. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. The waves were calm, the horizon stretching infinitely before us. Emily, ever the adventurer, decided she wanted to swim under the fading light. "Just for a minute," she had said, her smile daring me to join her. I hesitated. The water was too cold, and the current, though seemingly gentle, made me uneasy. But Emily wasn't one to be deterred. She darted into the surf before I could say another word, her laughter trailing behind her. I stood on the shore, watching her figure blur against the rippling water. For a moment, everything felt timeless. And then she screamed. It wasn't playful, like her usual squeals when the water surprised her with its chill. This was raw, guttural, a sound that clawed at my chest. "Emily!" I shouted, wading in as panic gripped me. The water churned around me, its icy fingers dragging at my legs. She was thrashing, her arms flailing against the waves, her voice dissolving into gurgles. I dove toward her, but the current seemed to multiply its strength, pulling her farther and farther away. One moment her face was there, pale and terrified, her mouth open in a desperate cry. The next, she was gone. The search went on for days, but the ocean kept her secret. They never found her body. Weeks passed, and I tried to convince myself she was gone, that she'd never walk that stretch of beach with me again. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see her, her wide, frightened eyes, the way her lips formed my name before she disappeared. Then, a month to the day after she drowned, I woke to the sound of her laughter. It wasn't coming from my dreams. It was outside. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The sound was faint, like it was being carried by the wind. But as I sat up in bed, heart pounding, I realized it wasn't just some trick of my mind. It was her. Emily's laughter, light and musical, drifted through the open window. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled toward the window, nearly tripping over a chair. The beach wasn't far from my house, maybe a 10-minute walk through the dunes, but hearing her voice so clearly, so unmistakably, sent a chill through me. I leaned out, peering into the darkness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the sand and waves. At first, I didn't see anything. Then movement caught my eye. A figure was standing at the edge of the water. "Emily?" The name escaped my lips before I could stop myself. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. It just stood there, silhouetted against the restless waves. I should have stayed inside, but something stronger than fear pulled me forward. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down to the beach, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air was colder than it should have been, biting at my skin even through my jacket. The sand felt wrong under my feet, damp and sticky, as though it had soaked up more than just seawater. When I reached the shoreline, she was gone. I shone the flashlight across the water, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but rippling waves. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then I saw them. Footprints. They led from the waterline to where I stood, perfectly spaced as if someone had walked calmly from the surf. But they ended right in front of me. No retreating steps, no sign of someone turning back, just an abrupt stop. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring at the beach, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the hours crawled by in silence, and by the time the sun rose, I'd convinced myself it had all been some cruel trick of grief. Until the next night. This time I didn't hear laughter. I heard the sound of wet footsteps slapping against the wooden floor of my hallway. I froze in bed, my body rigid with fear. The sound grew louder, moving closer, until it stopped just outside my bedroom door. "Emily?" My voice was barely a whisper. The door creaked open. The door swung inward, slow and deliberate. My flashlight, sitting on the nightstand, was within reach. My shaking hand grabbed it, and I aimed the beam at the open doorway. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the dim light illuminating only the scuffed wooden floor and peeling wallpaper. But the footsteps, they had sounded so real. I swung my legs out of bed and crept toward the door, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The house was dead silent, save for the faint crash of the waves outside. I hesitated in the doorway, straining to hear anything, breathing, movement, anything that might explain what had just happened. Then I saw it. The floorboards just beyond the threshold were wet. The unmistakable outline of bare footprints trailed down the hall, glistening faintly in the flashlight's beam. I followed them, each step making my stomach twist tighter. They led to the living room, where they stopped abruptly in front of the large window that faced the beach. The curtains were open, and she was there. Emily stood just outside the window, her face pale and her eyes wide and glassy. Her clothes clung to her as though they were still soaked from the sea, her hair stringy and matted against her skin. She didn't move. She just stared. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Emily?" I managed to choke out. Her lips twitched, curling into a small, almost wistful smile. And then she turned and walked away, her figure vanishing into the mist that clung to the dunes. By morning, the footprints were gone, the floor dry as if nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a fever dream brought on by exhaustion and grief. But I couldn't shake the image of her face. Her lifeless yet strangely serene expression burned into my memory. I stayed away from the beach that evening, locking every door and window in the house as if that could somehow keep her out. But she found a way. It was just after midnight when I heard the knocking. 3 sharp, deliberate taps at the front door. My heart dropped. I stared at the clock, hoping it was some late-night visitor, maybe even a mistake. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself to get up, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. "Who is it?" My voice cracked. No answer. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves in the distance. And then, "Let me in." Her voice was muffled but unmistakable. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. "Let me know if you're ready for part 4. My breath caught in my throat. It was her voice, soft but insistent, each word dripping with something that felt more like authority than desperation. "Let me in, please," she said again, her tone gentler this time. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. My mind raced. Emily was dead. I saw her die. This wasn't her. Couldn't be. I can't. I stammered, my voice barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment I thought she might have gone. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The door didn't open. It was locked. But the sight of the knob twisting as if an invisible hand gripped it made my legs weak. "Please," she whispered again. But this time her voice sounded different. It was layered, distorted, as if 2 voices were speaking at once. One hers, the other something darker. The knob stopped moving, and then came the scratching. It started low, almost hesitant, like fingernails dragging lightly over the wood. But it quickly grew more frantic, the sound of nails splintering as they scraped deeper and deeper into the door. I backed away, clutching the flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. The noise was unbearable, a grating cacophony that echoed through the house. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stood there, trembling, staring at the door. The house was silent again, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. And then a single word. Tomorrow. The voice was low and guttural, nothing like Emily's. It reverberated through the room, shaking me to my core. I didn't open the door. The next day, I tried to piece together what was happening. I combed through old photos of us at the beach, trying to remember if I had missed something. Anything that might explain what I was experiencing. That's when I found the photo. It was taken on the day we first discovered the little cove. A selfie of the two of us grinning at the camera. But as I stared at it, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. Emily's smile seemed tighter, her eyes less vibrant. But the longer I looked, the more her expression changed. Her face twisted, her smile stretching unnaturally wide, her eyes darkening until they were nothing but empty sockets. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. When I picked it back up, it was normal again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I didn't bother locking the doors. I knew it wouldn't matter. When the knocking started again, I didn't move. This time, it came from the back door. Knock, knock, knock. Let me in. Her voice was closer now, as if she were speaking directly into my ear. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. I just sat on the floor of the living room, my back pressed against the couch, staring at the hallway that led to the back door. The knocking came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Let me in, she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the silence like a blade. I gripped the flashlight, though I knew it was useless. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide, to do something, but my body refused to obey. Then the door creaked open. Shouldn't have. I hadn't unlocked it, but the sound was unmistakable. The slow groan of old hinges protesting against the movement. Thank you, she whispered, and the voice was right behind me. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, the shadows stretching and shifting as the flashlight's beam shook in my unsteady hand. And then I saw them again. Wet footprints, leading from the back door and stopping just a few feet away from where I stood. I followed their path with the flashlight, my pulse roaring in my ears. They didn't end this time. Instead, they led around the corner, toward the hallway that connected to the bedroom. Emily, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer, just the faint sound of water dripping, each drop echoing louder than it should. I moved toward the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The footprints glistened in the dim light, their edges blurred as if they were fresh. When I turned the corner, I froze. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me. Her hair hung in damp, stringy strands, her clothes clinging to her thin frame. Water pooled around her feet, spreading slowly across the floor. She was unnaturally still, her shoulders rigid, her head slightly tilted. Emily, I whispered again, my voice trembling. She turned. Her face was wrong. Her features were twisted, her skin pale and bloated as if she had just been pulled from the water. Her eyes were dark, empty pits that seemed to swallow the light. Why didn't you save me? She rasped, her voice hollow and accusing. My throat closed, the words catching before they could form. You promised, she said, stepping closer. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as though her joints didn't work properly. I tried, I stammered, backing away. Emily, I tried, but she didn't stop. She kept coming, her wet, gnarled hands reaching for me. I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the wet floor as I scrambled back into the living room. The air felt heavier, colder, every breath a struggle. I reached the front door and yanked it open, stumbling out into the night. The wind howled around me, carrying the salty tang of the ocean. But the beach wasn't empty. There, at the edge of the water, stood Emily. No, another Emily. She looked just as she had the night she drowned, her golden hair glowing softly in the moonlight, her eyes full of life and warmth. She held out a hand to me, her expression one of sorrow and pleading. Come back to the shore, she called, her voice cutting through the chaos in my mind. I turned back toward the house, where the other version of her was now standing in the doorway, her twisted face locked in a snarl of rage. I was trapped between them. I froze, torn between the two versions of her. The Emily by the water, luminous and achingly familiar, and the thing in the doorway, a distorted nightmare wearing her face. "Come to me." The Emily on the beach pleaded, her voice soft, almost melodic. She extended her hand again, her eyes shimmering with an emotion I couldn't place. Regret, maybe, or sorrow. The creature in the doorway growled, a low, guttural sound that didn't belong to any human throat. It stepped out of the house, its movements jerky and predatory, water dripping from its twisted form. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled backward, my gaze flicking between them. "Please," the Emily on the shore called again. "I can explain, but you have to trust me. Don't listen to her." The other hissed, its voice scraping like nails on glass. "She's lying. You belong to me." My head spun, panic clawing at my chest. None of this made sense. I was trapped in some surreal nightmare, and no choice felt safe. "Why?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" Both of them froze. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves and my own ragged breathing. The Emily on the shore dropped her hand, her expression tightening with anguish. "Because I never left," she said. "The ocean, it took something from me, from us, but it didn't let me go." The other Emily let out a shriek of rage, the sound sharp enough to make my ears ring. "She is the liar," it spat, its bloated body convulsing as it lurched closer. "She doesn't know what's real, but I do. I'm here because of you." I took another step back, my bare feet sinking into the cool sand. "What do you mean? What do either of you mean?" The Emily on the beach looked at me with a sadness so deep it seemed to bleed into the night itself. "The promise," she said quietly. "You promised to always come back here no matter what. And now," she glanced at the other figure, her voice trembling, "now it's too late." The creature hissed, its twisted features pulling into a mocking grin. "She doesn't understand, does she?" It turned its hollow eyes toward me, and for the first time, I felt a chilling familiarity in the way it looked at me. It wasn't just a creature. It was part of her. Something broken, something left behind. "You left me?" it snarled, stepping closer, its bloated hands reaching for me. "You didn't try hard enough. You let me drown." The accusation hit like a physical blow. I staggered, guilt and terror mingling in a suffocating wave. "I tried," I shouted, tears burning in my eyes. "I swear to God, I tried to save you." The Emily on the shore took another step toward me, her face glowing with an otherworldly light. "You didn't fail," she said softly. "But the ocean, it doesn't care. Takes what it wants. And now it wants you." The creature shrieked, its bloated body lurching forward with unnatural speed. I turned toward the beach, my legs moving on pure instinct as I sprinted toward the glowing figure of Emily. The air seemed to thicken as I ran, the sound of the waves growing louder, deafening. The sand clung to my feet, each step harder than the last. Behind me, I could hear the other Emily, its wet, slapping footsteps chasing me, closing the distance. When I reached the water's edge, the glowing Emily reached out and grabbed my hand. Her touch was cold, but not unpleasant, more like the chill of a winter breeze. "Trust me," she said, her voice steady. She pulled me into the surf. The water was frigid, shocking the breath from my lungs as it soaked through my clothes. Emily gripped my hand tightly, her glowing form illuminating the swirling darkness around us. "Keep moving," she urged, her voice low but insistent. "It won't stop until it has you." I turned back, the salty spray stinging my eyes. The twisted figure was charging toward us, its bloated body distorted by the moonlight. Its hollow eyes burned with rage, and its arms flailed as if it were still fighting to swim in a current only it could feel. "Faster!" Emily pulled me deeper into the water, her golden hair trailing behind her like a beacon. The waves crashed against my chest, nearly knocking me off my feet. "Where are we going?" I shouted, my voice nearly drowned out by the roar of the sea. "Trust me," she said again, though her tone carried a desperation that hadn't been there before. I stumbled, my foot catching on something beneath the surface. A jagged rock, perhaps, or the remnants of some forgotten debris. I went under, salt water filling my mouth and nose as the current dragged me down. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was drowning. My limbs flailed, searching for the surface, but the water seemed to press in from all sides, cold and suffocating. Then her hand found mine. Emily pulled me up, her strength impossibly steady. As I broke the surface, gasping for air, I saw her face, still glowing, but now lined with fear. "It's here," she said, her voice trembling. I turned, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The creature had followed us into the water. It moved through the surf with unnatural grace, as though the waves were carrying it forward. Its mouth hung open in a soundless scream, water pouring from its gaping maw. Its eyes, those hollow, empty voids, locked onto mine, filled with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. "Get behind me," Emily said, her voice firm. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Her gaze softened for a moment, her glowing features almost human again. "Something I should have done a long time ago." She stepped forward, placing herself between me and the creature. The air seemed to change, the water growing eerily still around us. The creature hesitated, its distorted limbs twitching as it regarded Emily with what almost looked like recognition. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice steady. "Neither of us do." The creature let out a guttural, choking noise, its bloated body convulsing as it reached for her. Emily raised her hand, and for a moment, the glow around her intensified, illuminating the dark sea in brilliant gold. The creature shrieked, its form flickering as though it were caught between two worlds. "I release you," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "But you can't have him." The creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air. There was a blinding flash, and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. The water was calm again, the moonlight reflecting off the gentle ripples. Emily stood a few feet away, her glow fading as she turned to face me. "It's over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to believe her, but the look in her eyes told me otherwise. "Emily?" I took a step toward her, but she held up a hand to stop me. "I can't stay," she said, her voice breaking. "No." The word tore from my throat, raw and desperate. "You don't have to go. We can fix this, we can." She shook her head, tears streaming down her glowing face. "The ocean took me and I can't come back, but it's letting you go." The water around her began to glow faintly, a soft, golden light spreading outward like ripples. "Promise me," she said, her voice trembling. "Promise me you'll live, that you'll let me go." My chest felt tight, my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I promise." She smiled, her form flickering as the light grew brighter. "Thank you." And then she was gone. The stillness that followed was suffocating. The waves lapped gently at my legs, as if nothing had happened, as if the ocean wasn't holding secrets too dark to comprehend. Emily was gone, her golden light swallowed by the sea, leaving me alone in the vast, cold expanse of water. I stumbled back to the shore, my legs trembling, my mind reeling from everything I had just seen. The sand felt foreign beneath my feet, like I had returned to a place that no longer welcomed me. The house loomed in the distance, its dark windows watching me like hollow eyes. I didn't want to go back, didn't want to face the memories that lingered within those walls. But there was nowhere else to go. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, an earthy, briny scent like damp seaweed. But as I moved through the house, it grew stronger, more pungent. It clung to the air, to the walls, to my skin. And then I saw them, wet footprints, leading from the back door to the living room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The prints were smaller this time, delicate, like a child's. They stopped in front of the window, the same window where I had first seen her weeks ago. The curtains were closed now, but I could feel something on the other side. I inched closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The faint rustle of fabric sent a shiver down my spine. My hand trembled as I reached for the curtain, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. When I pulled it back, the window was empty, just the dark stretch of beach and the endless expanse of ocean beyond. But the reflection, in the glass I saw her. It wasn't the glowing Emily from the shore, nor the bloated, twisted figure that had chased me through the house. It was something else entirely. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth slightly open as if caught mid-sentence. She stared at me, her expression frozen in a mask of despair. I stumbled back, the curtain falling shut, breaking the reflection. My pulse thundered in my ears as I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. "Emily?" I whispered, though I already knew she wouldn't answer. But something else did. A faint dripping sound echoed through the house, rhythmic and deliberate. I followed the sound, my legs moving of their own accord. It led me to the bathroom, the door slightly ajar. The light was flickering inside, casting eerie shadows on the tiled walls. The dripping grew louder as I stepped closer, each drop punctuating the silence like a heartbeat. I pushed the door open. The bathtub was full, the water dark and murky, rippling gently as if something had just moved beneath the surface. On the mirror, written in dripping, jagged letters, were two words: "Come back." I stared at the mirror, my breath hitching in my throat. The words shimmered as the water dripped down the glass, the letters distorted but unmistakable. "Come back." The bathtub rippled again, the water's surface breaking as if something beneath it was shifting. My legs locked in place, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The water stilled for a moment, the room falling silent save for the flickering buzz of the overhead light. Then, slowly, something began to rise. First, it was a hand, small, pale, and impossibly thin. The fingers splayed as they broke the surface. Then another, both gripping the edge of the tub with a strength that seemed unnatural for such frail limbs. And then her face emerged. It was her, but it wasn't. Her features were bloated and pallid, her eyes sunken and rimmed with darkness. Her hair clung to her face in wet strands, water pouring from her mouth as she gasped for air. "Why didn't you come back?" she rasped, her voice watery and choked. I don't understand," I stammered, backing away. Her hands gripped the edge of the tub tighter, the sound of her nails scraping against the porcelain setting my teeth on edge. "You left me," she hissed, her voice rising. "You promised you'd stay. You promised." I stumbled against the doorframe, my mind reeling. "I tried to save you. I didn't leave you. I couldn't." "You could have," she spat, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. "You chose to let me go." The water in the tub began to churn violently, spilling over the sides and pooling on the floor. Her figure twisted and contorted, her limbs bending at unnatural angles as she pulled herself halfway out of the tub. "I didn't mean to," I shouted, the words spilling from me in a frantic rush. "Emily, I didn't mean to let you go." Her face softened for a moment, her head tilting as though she was considering my words. But then her expression darkened, her mouth twisting into a cruel smile. "Liar," she hissed. The water surged toward me, a torrent that knocked me off my feet and sent me sprawling onto the wet tiles. It was freezing, soaking through my clothes in an instant, and it carried with it the overpowering stench of salt and decay. I tried to crawl away, but the water kept coming, rising higher and higher until it was lapping at my chin. Emily's form towered above me now, her figure shifting and warping as if she were made of the water itself. "You belong here," she said, her voice echoing as though it came from all around me. "With me." Her hands reached for me, and I felt their icy grip close around my wrists. I don't know how I broke free. One moment, I was drowning in that impossible tide, her hollow eyes staring into mine. The next, I was gasping for air on the living room floor, the house eerily quiet once more. The bathroom was dry when I checked it, the tub empty, the mirror clean. But the words still echoed in my mind, relentless and inescapable. "Come back." That night I had the dream. I was standing on the shore again, the waves calm and inviting. Emily was there, her figure glowing softly in the moonlight. She looked like herself again, her hair golden, her eyes alive. "Come back to the water," she said, holding out her hand. I took a step forward, the sand cool beneath my feet. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because it's the only way," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing. "You'll understand when you're here." The waves lapped at my toes, and I felt their pull, gentle, but insistent. I woke up drenched in sweat, the taste of salt heavy on my tongue, and the sound of waves was coming from inside the house. The sound of waves filled the house, deep and rhythmic, as though the ocean itself had seeped into the walls. My breath caught in my throat as I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The living room was dark, the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. But the sound, it was louder now, impossibly close, the crash and retreat of water echoing all around me. I stood, every nerve in my body screaming to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But my feet wouldn't obey. The air grew colder as I stepped into the hallway, my body moving as if drawn by some unseen force. The sound of the waves grew louder, more insistent, and with it came a voice, soft and familiar, yet wrong in ways I couldn't explain. "Come back," it whispered, the words weaving through the crashing surf. I reached the front door, my hand trembling as I turned the knob. The salt air hit me immediately, sharp and bracing, carrying with it the faintest hint of decay. The beach stretched before me, bathed in silvery moonlight. The waves were impossibly high, churning and crashing with a ferocity that seemed unnatural. And there, standing at the water's edge, was Emily. She was waiting. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was walking toward her, the sand cold and damp beneath my feet. She turned as I approached, her face radiant in the moonlight, her smile soft and inviting. "You came back," she said, her voice filled with something like relief. "I don't understand," I said, my voice breaking. "Why is this happening? Why won't you let me go?" Her expression faltered, her eyes filling with sadness. "I didn't mean to trap you," she said, "but the ocean, it doesn't let go. It wants us both now." I took a step back, the reality of her words sinking in like a lead weight. "No," I said, shaking my head. "You can stop this. You can." "I can't," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "It's too late. The ocean took me and now it's taking you. It won't stop." The waves surged closer, the foam licking at my ankles. The pull was stronger now, more forceful, and I could feel it wrapping around me, dragging me closer to the water. "Emily, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I don't want to die." She reached for me, her hand cold but steady. "You won't die," she said. "You'll come with me. We'll be together." "No," I shouted, yanking my hand away. "This isn't what you wanted. This isn't what we promised." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the Emily I had loved. The girl who laughed with the waves, who made the world feel alive. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't want to be alone." The ocean roared, and the water surged up around us, swallowing the sand and pulling me toward its depths. I fought with everything I had, my legs churning against the current, my hands clawing at the sand. But it was no use. The water was relentless, its grip unyielding. "Emily," I screamed, the salt water burning my throat. "Let me go." Her face twisted with pain, her figure flickering like a dying flame. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. The waves pulled harder, dragging me under. The last thing I saw was her face, glowing faintly in the darkness, her expression a mixture of sorrow and longing. Then everything went black. I woke up on the shore, the sun rising over the horizon. My clothes were damp, my body aching as though I'd been through a storm. The beach was empty, the house was empty, but the ocean wasn't. Every time I go to the shore now, I see her. Just beyond the waves, her figure shimmering like a mirage. She doesn't speak, doesn't beckon me closer. She just watches, her eyes filled with an unspoken plea. And at night, When the house is quiet, I still hear the sound of the waves. I know what they're saying. Come back.